Number 1, write each expression in simplest radical form. So looking at all these radicals here, we're taking some kind of root of 32. Here's the square root of 32, the cube root of 32, the fourth root of 32, and the fifth root of 32. So when we write these in simplest radical form, we need to figure out so for the square root, we need to figure out what's the largest perfect square that's a factor of 32. And that happens to be 16 times 2. So this is the square root of 16 times the square root of 2, which is 4 radical 2. So when the index there is really 2, we're figuring out what's the perfect square that's a factor of 32. The perfect cube, we need to say what's the largest perfect cube of 32. Well, 32 can be written as 8 times 4. So I have the cube root of 8 times the cube root of 4. Well, the cube root of 8 is 2, because 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. 2 cube roots of 4. Those are my final answers for the first two. What's the fourth root of 32? Well, the fourth root of 32 is what's the largest what number to the fourth power is a factor of 32? Well, again, this happens to be 16 again. 16 times 2. So I have the fourth root of 16 times the fourth root of 2. Well, what's the fourth root of 16? What number times itself is 16? Well, that's 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. So I get 2 fourth roots of 2. And finally, the fifth root of 32. What number times itself 5 times is a factor of 32? Well, 32 is actually 2 to the fifth. So I have the fifth root of 2 to the fifth. The fifth root and to the fifth power are inverses of each other, so this actually just equals 2, because 2 to the fifth equals 2 to the fifth equals 32. Number 2, express each of the following in simplest radical form. Assume that all variables represent positive numbers. A, the square root of 9x to the third. Well, we deal with the numbers, and then let's deal with the variables. The square root of 9 is 3, and the square root of x to the third. So the square root of 9 is 3. And the square root of x to the third is x squared times x. And what's the square root of x squared? Well, that's 3x, and I'm left with the square root of x, because the square root of x squared is x. B, the square root of 27x squared. So I need to figure out what's the square root of 27 and what's the square root of x squared. Well, because it's a positive number, the square root of x squared is x. And now I need to figure out what's the square root of 27. Well, that's the square root of 9 times the square root of 3. So I have 3x radical 3. C, the square root of 36x to the fifth y squared z. Well, we know that the square root of 36 is 6. The square root of x to the fifth. Well, that's x squared times x squared times x. So I can take out x squared from there and be left with the square root of x. What's the square root of y squared? Well, that gives me times y. Times the square root of z, I can't simplify that at all. So I have 6x squared y times the square root of xz. I said how many groups of 2 could I take out from x to the fifth? I can take out 2 groups of 2, so that's why I have x squared. D, 6 times the fourth root of a to the fifth b to the 14th. Well, I have 6. How many groups of 4 can I take out from a to the fifth? I can take out 1 group of 4, and I'm left with the fourth root of a. How many groups of 4 can I take out from b to the 14th? I can take out 3 of them, because that takes care of b to the 12th. I have the fourth root of b squared. So my final answer is 6ab cubed, the fourth root of ab squared. E, the cube root of negative 16 x to the 7th y to the 9th. So the cube root of negative 16, let's tackle that first. Well, that's the cube root of negative 8 times the cube root of 2. Well, the cube root of negative 8 is negative 2 times the cube root of 2. The cube root of x to the 7th, Well, that gives me x squared, the cube root of x, because 3 goes into 7 two times, and I'm left with 1. And then I have the cube root of y to the 9th. Well, 3 goes into 9 three times, so y cubed. So my final answer is negative 2 x squared y cubed times the cube root of 2x. So our final answer is negative 2 x squared y cubed times the cube root of 2x. And letter F. Well, the cube root of a quotient is the quotient of the cube root. So we need to do the cube root of a to the 4th, b to the 9th, over the cube root of negative 64. Well, I know what number times itself gives me negative 64. That's negative 4. I can take out one group of 3 from y to the 4th and be left with one of them. So I have the cube root of a, because I took out 3 of them to make that a. And the cube root of b to the 9th, I can take out 3 of them, and I'm not left with any. So my final answer is ab cubed times the cube root of a over negative 4.